Welcome to the Future of Surrogacy, the podcast that explores the people, the innovations, and the ideas building the next generation of surrogacy. So, today's topic tends to raise some eyebrows and sometimes some hackles in the surrogacy world: private equity. And let's be honest, some people think it signals a sellout. But what is the real story? Our guest today, Caitlyn Devine, is uniquely positioned to answer that. She runs the oldest surrogacy agency in operation anywhere in the world, with a 40-year legacy, a deeply personal mission, and a team that supports 90 carefully managed journeys a year. Oh, and she's also a former surrogate herself. Recently, her agency made the decision to take on private investment, and I had the chance to meet with them a few weeks ago and was really impressed with her reasoning behind that. So today she's here to walk us through why and how it's impacted their work, their values, and their future. So if you think private equity automatically means a growth at all costs mentality or a $100,000 a month marketing budget, this episode might help you see another perspective. And I already hear our guests laughing at that. So, welcome to the Future of Surrogacy, Caitlyn.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I think you're brave for being here because I think private equity it's a topic, that it does. You say the words and people are immediately like, ah.
Yeah.
So why don't we start? Tell us a little bit about CSP, who you are, what you stand for.
Yeah. So Center for Surrogate Parenting, like you mentioned, has been around for over 40 years. We were the very first surrogacy agency to service a same-sex couple within the United States. We were previously individually owned, and our previous owner made the decision to sell to private equity. And that has changed our business over the last few years, I think for the better. So I'm happy to share, my thoughts on that as we go. We're a little bit smaller agency now. We've scaled down a bit over the years, and we have a staff around 10 now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's like that in itself, I think is interesting because when I hear private equity, I think like circle surrogacy, biggest ones or that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so you are a little bit more boutique in terms of your size and I mean, not small by any means. I mean, 90 journeys.
Right.
Uh, but but on the smaller side compared to some of the ones we hear about, especially when it relates to private equity. So I'm curious, and I know it wasn't you that made the decision to take the initial investment, but as the person running the agency now, I am so curious in terms of the results of that investment.
I feel very positively about our private equity backing for quite a few reasons. Prior to my joining the surrogacy industry, I worked in very corporate environment with NBC Universal, and transferring over to Center for Surrogate Parenting, they didn't have as much foundation that I was used to coming from somewhere very corporate into an agency. I was used to data and numbers and information at the highest level to really understand the business that you're in. When I started with Center for Surrogate Parenting, I wasn't given a lot of that information. That's certainly not to say that it didn't exist, but I don't think it existed to the highest level that I was used to. So when the private equity came on board, that really changed our foundation and infrastructure. I can give my team so much data now that we didn't have then. And I think it really has helped us understand our business in a way that we didn't before. We've always worked hard. The team has always done really great work. And now they understand it in a way that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
I've been very lucky with our acquisition and our private equity owners and their partnership with us. So for me and my experience, and I like to think my employees would say the same, it's been a very positive experience. Although unsure, I think anytime this happens, when you go from a mom and pop style business to now something very corporate, you're going to have those who aren't on board. You're going to have this period of, is my job secure? What does this mean for the future of our business? I love my job as it is. How much is it going to change? So I think anytime that comes into play, there's always going to be a transition period, and some people will continue and some won't. And I think that's overall what you can expect when this sort of thing happens.
I mean, this is almost exactly how you explained it when we were talking a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, gosh, this is so interesting because I think people think private equity and they're like, oh, corporate overlords telling you
Yeah.
exactly what you can do. And instead, and again, we're not pitching or catching up whether people should take private equity because that's such
Right.
a specific to your agency, specific to your financial structure, what you want for the future, all of that. That's a decision
Exactly.
agency owners have to make. But I don't think a lot of people have thought about it this way,
Right.
where it can be, and now that we've interacted with you a little bit too, I think CSP hasn't lost any kind of personal touch or
Yeah.
your mission has stayed the same. But
Yes.
to the way that you explained it to me, at least, it felt like it was more business best practices have been
100%.
instilled and kind of that structure at which,
Right.
but it doesn't mean cutting corners and it doesn't mean get as many in the door as you can kind of thing.
For sure. I think there's opportunity for that. And I feel a lot of pride when you say it sounds like CSP hasn't lost its heart, because that is knowing the owners previously and the ones who created Center for Surrogate Parenting. It was really built on heart and values and ethics. And as the manager now, that it's my responsibility to keep that. No matter what business decisions are made, I feel deeply about the industry as a whole. So I feel as a leadership skill, I have to instill that into my employees, no matter what is going around me, no matter what is happening from the top down. It's how I show up for my employees. And that trickles down into our clients and our surrogates.
Yeah, but that's kind of a dance. I mean, you're not in an easy position,
No,
especially because, again, like surrogacy is such a deeply personal feel,
very.
and
One of
so
the biggest, I think, personal journeys people can take on.
exactly. And so managing that balance of corporate best practice in terms of
Hmm.
how can we serve our surrogates? How can we serve our intended parents,
Right.
in the way they need us to show up, while keeping an eye on the business.
Right.
But I come from the world of adoption and it was the same balance in terms of
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I hate even using business terms when
Right.
when you're
Yeah,
talking about these kind of very human experiences, but it is a business.
it is. And I
And
love my staff and I want them to keep their jobs and be able to feed their families. So
yeah,
it is a very delicate balance between how far do we push the business progressing, especially as far as finances go. This is a very expensive process already. I always lead any meetings with our executives with a client first thought process. And I
yeah.
try, it's not always easy. Sometimes it gets very uncomfortable how much I feel I have to advocate. And I feel like I'm about to show up to this meeting and kind of oppose what they're wanting us to do. But I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I didn't advocate for my clients and my staff and our surrogates who come to us. And I do understand the business aspect because I want CSP to be here for years and years to come. So, like you mentioned, it very much is a dance between business and the heart and the ethics of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so any safeguards that you have put in place to preserve your values and culture?
I feel like my biggest safeguard is my team, is
Mhm.
my staff. And I almost feel like the barrier between the corporate and the clients and my staff. When the acquisition came, quite a few staff members chose not to stay with CSP. And I think that is a reflection of that point in time, the transition that I mentioned that everyone goes through of, am I going to like my job? Is the heart of it still going to be here? And it did take some time. And there was a few months where we struggled with directors that are no longer overseeing CSP, but there was some give and take. It was a trying out process, and it took a while. Go ahead.
But what were
Yeah.
they were afraid of losing the heart, but to
Yeah.
what does that mean?
I think it's everyone's fear of taking in clients or taking their money, even though we're not sure they would be the right fit for us or that we have a match for them.
Yeah.
Taking surrogates who may not meet the criteria just in an effort to match clients sooner. They were afraid that those things would follow, that we would be forced to forgo our ethics and what we know in our hearts to be the right thing in an effort to bring in more business.
Hmm.
And I think that was tried. It's been suggested, but I also think that's because surrogacy is unlike any other business out there. And I think a lot of private equity look at it like a healthcare business.
Mhm.
I try my very hardest to explain that it is less like healthcare and more like hospitality, because our clients and surrogates are not numbers. And we could have a consultation with a set of intended parents, and they may not be ready for 5 years from now, depending on what their journey to this looks like, especially from a financial aspect. I mean, we have embryos. There's so much to consider in this process. So when the staff chose to leave, I think they were just very unsure of, is this going to become a numbers? Can I do my job and feel good about it? And like I said, there was a while where it was a little rocky, but CSP still is at the very core of it, heart, ethics, and people first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think people hear private equity and they just lump it all into the same kind of category. And I think it has a lot to do, again, like your leadership in terms of making sure everybody is reminded that. I love the analogy of hospitality, not healthcare.
Yeah.
Because I think that really spells it out in terms of like, this is such a individually unique journey.
You'll never see the same journey twice, no matter how similar intended parents or surrogates seem. It's always different. And I like my staff to treat them as that. I think I would be doing the industry a disservice to allow it to be changed in such a way.
Well, I'm curious because and this wasn't a question on our schedule, but you said that others left, but you were there when the owner decided to take private investment. And so, two questions. One is, what was your thought process in staying? And were there any messages that the previous owner communicated to you that you saw this as an advantage versus a disadvantage? And then the second part to that is, as a former surrogate, putting yourself in a surrogate's shoes,
Right.
would you even know that an agency was private equity backed, or and would you care?
So my thought process when the acquisition came is, like I mentioned, I came from very corporate. So I'm like, if this gives me more information on how I'm doing in my own individual job, bring it. Like, I want to know if the business I'm working for is doing well or not doing well. I need that security, not only for myself, but for my family and my job and my future. So I was all about it. I'm very type A. I'm very control freakish. So any information you can provide me, I'm having. I love it. I'll take it. Of course, I had those concerns about, I don't want, this is so, like we mentioned, it's so deeply personal. I never want to force or do anything outside of my own comfort as far as ethics. So that was, of course, a concern. But I trusted the previous owner immensely, knowing she had built this business for 40 years from the ground up.
Yeah.
It's not something I ever felt she would be flippant about or make a rash decision. I knew if this was something she was considering, that it was a smart move.
Did she bring you along in that journey, or bring the employees along in that journey? Or was it like a, hey, everybody, we decided to do this?
Yeah, it was a very, hey, we decided to do this. And it was right before COVID. So everything was put in a blender and all spun up. But it was very quick. But I trusted her. I didn't think twice about it because she's a brilliant human, incredibly kind. I knew she wouldn't do anything to damage her employee and the legacy that she had built.
Yeah. Okay. And then that second part about, well, you can put yourself in a former surrogate shoes since you were one, but is that something that you think a surrogate would know about and or care about?
I don't think it's something that surrogates are currently looking into. I personally wouldn't care. My main concern as a gestational carrier is the escrow good? Is my doctor nice to me? And do I feel like they have a great bedside manner? And do my IPs feel supported? You know, that's my main concern. I definitely think the agency has a role, But I would hope that no matter what happened, that agencies, private equity or not, are supporting the surrogates in the same way they would no matter what. So as a surrogate, I don't think that's not something I would currently look into or be heavily concerned with.
Yeah. Okay. So, talking to any potential critics of taking private equity investment, is there anything that you would say to people who believe that surrogacy should never include outside investment?
That's tough. I think CSP has gotten very lucky because of our investors, because of who they are and the trust that they have grown to have in me
Mhm.
and my vision in this business. It can be very risky, I think, when they come in not understanding what surrogacy is. I think alignment will be key in this. Do they understand how this business acts? Do they understand that it's not a get rich quick thing for anybody? Like, just because this costs so much doesn't mean all of that money comes in up front. I think it really comes down to, do you feel aligned with who is looking at your business? Do you feel like they have the same ethics and values? It has to feel like a relationship. You're going to have differences from your spouse or partner, but do you agree on how to raise the kids? Which is the biggest one. Can we differ on a few things, but do we agree on how to raise the business and understand that there's going to be some give and takes? There's going to be sacrifices in some area.
Yeah.
And ultimately, in the end, it goes back to one of my favorite sayings is, the man who chases two rabbits catches neither. So
What does that mean?
what it means is, if they're truly just money based, your clients and your surrogates will suffer. If you treat people like numbers, customer service goes out the window. Nobody wins. No matter if you bring more and more and more and provide less value, provide less service and care, you eventually won't be getting anyone.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge to chase numbers and customer service. So I think if you really lead with the care and customer service, and like I mentioned, this is more hospitality than data, numbers, healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
the people will come. When you treat people nicely, when they feel trusting and supported, they'll come.
Yeah. You spoke to some of the I think maybe some of the fears that people have about taking on private equity investment. And I think you're exactly right. Again, coming from my last business, which was venture backed, I heard horror stories about some of my founder friends who took investment from bad investors. And you're married to these people. Everybody says consider it at least a 10-year marriage. But some of the good sides that you talked about too, with the data and best practices. This question wasn't on the schedule either, but I'm just curious in terms of, is there technology that they asked you to use or asked you to integrate into the business and that you think has helped the business?
We
Okay.
have an entire new administrative site on the back end. Our website still appears the same, but our administrative site is brand new. Thank you to our acquisition.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it was like a dinosaur. I mean, it
Yeah.
was really complicated, notes everywhere. All of us knew it because it pretty much was built along the way. But now we have a new administrative site where we can draw up reports, we can find things easier, find them faster. And I think that's incredibly valuable for us. So it's more of the infrastructure that they've brought with them and the money to put it in place. It's hard when you're a smaller, I would say CSP is really a medium-sized business, but I think all surrogacy suffered during the time of COVID. It's one of those things where you invest hoping that it pays off, where our private equity didn't mind investing, knowing that it would take a little bit to see it back. So
Yeah.
they really weren't afraid to invest in CSP because they knew the potential was there. They knew that they would get their money back for whatever money spent. So if we were a smaller business, we may not have the amount of money to make these bigger changes on the back end. But
Yeah.
thank you to them, we did. And it's so much nicer. It makes my employees feel more secure knowing that we have more up-to-date technology, that we have reports available. So it
Oh,
makes a lot more sense for us and it's much easier.
so having since joined Simbi and, we're talking to agencies, lots of agencies
Yes.
every week. And I think two things that you just said. One is the amount of knowledge that lives in the brains of the people that are working in the surrogacy agents and the like, okay, need to remember to like the task lists and I thought
Yes.
existed in these. I mean, people that work at surrogacy agencies are incredible, but they're human. Like you're gonna let things
Right.
slip or you can't get
Mhm.
to everything. And so I think I was just so curious about the technologies that some of these private equity companies, because a million years ago worked with some private equity companies, and one of the first things they did was help implement technology solutions into companies. And so there were some efficiencies that they brought, and efficiency
Yeah.
also can be kind of a dirty word in surrogacy, but it doesn't necessarily mean cutting corners as much as it means
No.
we've already vetted it for you. We know how to install it. We know how to do the training. But are there
Right.
other things that you think, in terms of kind of being a force for good that private
Mhm.
equity can do when it's done right?
I really hope that there's more interest in affordability in the
Hmm.
future. And I really task the private equity companies to search that more. Everything is getting more expensive. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in surrogacy in general is affordability for intended parents. Surrogates are now wanting to be compensated more because the cost of living is going up. And so I'm hoping that the more that private equity gets involved in surrogacy, that we can source more ways for it to be affordable for intended parents, and safer. I'm really excited to see where the science is going and the testing of embryos and genetic testing, and the safer we can make surrogacy, the better.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, this is why I wanted to have you on this podcast. Okay, one more question, because I think people are always like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't want to do private equity because then I'm gonna have to run every decision by them and they're in every meeting or all. I'm just curious. Again, that was my point of view too. When I was like, oh my gosh, do I even want investors? But how much interaction are you having, and who actually holds the reins over there?
There's a whole executive team that really holds the reins. They consider me the advocate for my business. They care about what I have to say. They trust my history and expertise. And I think that's important when looking into an acquisition. Do they care what you think? Do they want a clean house the second they get into the business? Are they trusting of your history?
Yeah.
People within the surrogacy industry, like you mentioned, know a lot of it lives in the brain. It's hard to really write down, well, I have a feeling about this case, but we just have to see how it plays out. Sometimes there's a lot of feeling and not a lot of data, just over years of doing it and seeing it. So I'm very lucky that my voice is important to them and they know that I know my stuff. I would hope that for everyone. I know that's not the case for everyone when certain acquisitions come in. So that would be one of my, I think, decision points if that was something I was considering. What is my role and how much say do I have at the table as far as this business goes? They allow me to run the business as I think it should go. They're very trusting. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. I'm also very lucky, kind of circling back to the question about, what else has it afforded us? It's allowed us to really try on different things without the risk of it being a catastrophic error of decision making, whether that be, can we outsource some tasks that we're doing to better support our
Yeah.
clients in real time? So whether that be medical records review for gestational carriers, CSP does a preliminary records review prior to accepting her as a surrogate. Can we outsource that to someone who can do it maybe quicker, faster? We gave that a go once and mildly successful, but not really worth the investment. But that private equity afforded us the ability to try where we might not have been able to otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I also come from the branding industry, and people, when they just stay within one particular niche
Mhm.
forever, your focus tends to get more narrow
Right.
versus these private equity companies. And this was true when I was building brands for companies. I would take what we learned working with a healthcare company and apply it to something in consumer packaged goods. Or
Right.
I would take something that I learned from technology and
Mhm.
apply it to the higher education space. So it was that cross pollination of ideas and that exposure that I think the people within private equity see, where they're like, you know what, like this works really well over here. Like, could we try it here? But I'm very pro, efficiency in terms of,
Yeah.
we talk to the surrogacy agencies and they're like, they're having to evaluate everything on their own in their own
Mhm.
little bubble, as opposed to
It's
being
tough.
able to take this wider knowledge from somebody else and try it on. I
Yeah.
think it's
Private
fun.
equity is a very individual personal decision, similar to intended parents choosing their agency. There's a lot that you can't control in this process. The things that you can control is the team and the people you choose to support you, such as your agency, your attorney, your doctor, your clinic. So I feel like choice in the world of surrogacy is incredibly important. And that's something that I really hope to safeguard as private equity comes into play and hopefully things go positively. The industry feels very small. We all chat and share best practices. There's a group on Facebook that a lot of the industry professionals are on. And I know everyone feels the same way, but I think in the fear of trying to preserve what it is, we often ignore opportunity
Yeah.
for things to improve.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, one more question. These are years long journeys.
Right.
So as an intended parent, and this happened again in the adoption space, and it would drive me crazy, but agencies would take money and then they'd go out of business 9 months later.
Yeah.
Does that happen in surrogacy? Is that something that from a private equity backed agency that you feel so confident when you were
Right.
starting to engage with IPs and
Yeah.
surrogates that you're like, we're going to be here? Like
Right.
there's no like, I don't know if we're gonna get the lights on unless we get two more journeys or anything like that.
Yes. I think it for sure adds a layer of surety. I don't want to say that in a blanket statement because there's a lot of wonderful people who have small, individually owned boutique agencies who are ethically sound, doing amazing work. So I don't want to negate everything they're doing and just say, oh, all small boutiques are at the risk of taking your money or and disappearing. I certainly don't feel that way, but we're seeing it a little more. We saw I'm not sure if you're familiar with the escrow company that
Yeah, I
took,
heard.
yeah. So there is potential for that to happen here. I think the last time I checked, there was over 300 surrogacy agencies in operation, which seems wild, and I know there's not a lot of regulations required to open surrogacy agencies.
Yeah.
So is this operating safely? Do you know where your money is? There's a lot of risk involved in surrogacy alone. And that's not to say that a business that's backed by private equity won't go under.
Right.
What if they make the decision to get rid of it altogether?
Yeah.
I think there's a level of confidence that you could have in an equity backed agency. But like I mentioned, there's boutique agencies doing great work. So I think it's just really doing the research on who you're working with, their history in business. Have they had other businesses before? But I
Yeah.
think it's something that if someone approaches a business, I would have those discussions. I certainly would look into how can this benefit you? Is this a positive? And a private equity buying your agency doesn't mean you're gone. What role can you continue to play, especially like our director, that was part of the deal. They came in and she decided to retire from the agency, but I don't think that has to be with everyone. I mean, some people might want to take that money and go on a vacation and, sip margaritas for the rest of their life. Who knows, depending on the deal.
Yeah.
But knowing everybody in the surrogacy industry, I know people really have a heart for it and want to
Yeah.
continue to work in this field in some capacity.
Yeah, that's that balance. And I think you have struck that balance beautifully in terms of wanting to maintain the mission and the personal touch balanced with some of those business best practices.
For sure.
Okay, last question. We call it the magic wand.
Yes.
If you had a magic wand and you could change anything, what's the one thing you change in surrogacy?
There are two things, maybe three.
Uh-oh.
I'm working on one of them right now. I think affordability is the number one for me and the intended parents. It's really difficult when you know that they're on maybe 2 or 3 of their last embryos and they're running out of funds. And we all are hoping this transfer works, because if it doesn't, they may not be able to financially afford to keep going.
Yeah.
I would love to make this more affordable, more attainable. So, and I know some agencies, it's interesting because I'm seeing some agencies go the other route and they're like, well, we're just going to focus on the uber wealthy, charge a ton of money, and that's going to be our niche. Which, to each their own, if that's what you want to do. I hope that's working out for you. But there's so many people who deserve to be parents who aren't millionaires, who are hardworking citizens, who are teachers and, not making the highest amount of money. They all are deserving. And so if I could wave a magic wand, that would be my number one, is just making this affordable and accessible
Do you
for everybody.
see any, are there any oh man, if we could all just blank, that would wipe, 20% of the cost out? Do you see any opportunities for that as of right now, or it's just more of kind of a dream?
I think it would rely on health insurance to cover surrogacy more, to cover the reproductive endocrinologist working with the surrogate. And I think the bulk of it, which a lot of people think the bulk of the money goes to the agencies, which really isn't true. The bulk of it goes to the surrogate, which is very deserving. She deserves what she's receiving. So I think health insurance stepping in is part of it, but with that comes more complications, which, we may not want to get into. So it's more of a dream at this point, but I'm really hoping a genius comes along and is like, I found a way to make it accessible for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's number one.
Number 2 would be that every transfer would work the first time for everybody. That would be wonderful. If I could just make that happen, I would love that. It's very hard to see couples come in with a history of loss and trauma, and they really feel like surrogacy is the golden ticket for them. And there's no way it's not going to work.
Yeah.
It's always very difficult to have that conversation with intended parents. I think it should happen always, no matter how hard it is, to tell them we can do everything we possibly can, but it doesn't guarantee that it will work. It's hard to say, but I think they're deserving of that truth in this.
It's so hard for them to hear it, though. I mean, having been through that, I mean, I remember when we signed up to do IVF the first time, I was like, oh, okay, now we'll have a baby.
No, yeah.
And 3 cycles later, nothing.
Yeah. And then you're spending so much money on top of it. It's like insult to injury almost. Oh. So those are so tough. They're very tough to try and that's the hardest time, as I think a business owner, is when it's not successful, when they have to pay more money into the escrow for the surrogate. It's like, I'm so sorry this didn't work. Also, there's this financial component, that never gets easier.
Yeah.
And then the third one is, I believe intended parents need more support. Surrogacy is a very pro-surrogate environment, which I think, again, very appropriate. Surrogates deserve support and appreciation for what they do, me being one of them before. But I think agencies do what they can to make intended parents feel supported, but I think we lack a sense of community for intended parents. Agencies can only be there via phone call and email so much. I think if we can build a better community and education system for intended parents, this process wouldn't have to feel so lonely or so daunting. I know everybody's very private. We have a lot of clients who don't want to post publicly or share information publicly, which I'm always very respectful of. But I think even if you want to stay private, there's a way to build community. So I would love, and it's something that I've been really looking into in a small way. I've been working with a lactation consultant to provide education to intended parents on what the surrogate pumping looks like. Can they induce lactation themselves? Because I think that's very complicated when you've never given birth yourself, or where you're like a same-sex male couple where you're like, I don't know anything about this. So I'm working on, an educational piece for them for that. But there's so much more that needs to be done as far as just a feeling of support and community, and that you're not alone, because it feels very isolating. Fertility issues and surrogacy all feels like you're on an island by yourself with your spouse.
Hugely. I can't, yes,
Yeah.
again, like having been there, I mean, I call them the dark days when we were going through all of our
Mhm.
fertility stuff. It was like, it was the saddest I have ever been.
Yeah.
But then, and then we grew our family through adoption. And now I can't imagine having done our family any other way. Uh,
Right.
yeah. I know I induced my milk. So
Yeah.
I could breastfeed because I was like, I want that experience. And so I didn't even know it was a possibility with our first kiddo, but
Yeah.
with our second kiddo, I did induce my milk. I
That's
induced.
awesome. How was that experience for you? Was it difficult? Was it easy? If you don't mind me
Um,
asking.
oh gosh, no, I'm an open book about all this stuff. And I breastfed for about a week and I was like, forget this. Because we had formula fed our first kiddo, and I know there's a whole population of people that'll probably be like, "But breast milk is the best." And I
Yeah.
do not pitch or catch on any of that. But having had every other night a full night's sleep while raising a newborn because my husband and I could switch off, and having seen, a very healthy kiddo raised on formula, that
Yes.
I was like, forget this. This was because I immediately in that first week started hating my husband. That I was like, why do I have to be the one
Yeah.
doing this all
You're
the
like, you are breathing near me. Please leave.
time?
Yes. It's amazing what sleep can do. And I hate that women feel, the pressure
Yeah.
to everyone says breastfeeding and I have to give up sleep. And it's really a balance of doing what's best for your child, doing what's best for you, and all the noise that comes with social media these days on what you should not do.
Yeah.
Um, and breastfeeding, producing milk, pumping is all very hard.
Yeah.
I always tell everyone pumping after surrogacy is harder than the surrogacy itself, at least for me.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it very challenging.
We should do a podcast on just that for like the breastfeeding part of it.
I gave birth in January, not this past year, the year before. And I just now completed pumping for the family, like a year and a half later. So,
What
yeah.
service do you use to ship milk back and forth?
So there's a service called Milkify
Oh,
that is fairly new on the scene. But what they do is they send you a box that you put all of your frozen breast milk bags in. The company gets the box, they freeze dry all your breast milk, and
oh,
then they package it into packs. So it's shelf stable. You don't have to have it in the fridge. You rehydrate it with water, mix it up. So it acts like formula, and it lasts on the shelf for I think 2 years. You can travel with it, and it makes it just super easy for the parents. So that's what my intended father used this last time around. I'm not sure what the studies are as far as does it keep nutritional value in its entirety through the freeze drying and rehydrating process, but he still uses it. He has older children who are believe around 6 now, but he still has some and puts it in yogurts and smoothies when they're sick and all of those things. So it's really lasted them a long time.
wow, that's super cool. I have a girlfriend. She started the company Milk Stork.
We have a few clients who use them.
Yeah, I was going to say because what you were mentioning about insurance and benefits is they very smartly became an employee benefit.
That's awesome. It can be very expensive to ship. I mean, if you're talking hundreds of ounces and the weight and having to freeze it and overnight, it can be a daunting process for sure.
Yes. Okay. Well, we are way off of the private equity conversation, but it's important. And the idea behind this podcast was that taking investment doesn't equate to selling out
Right.
necessarily. And you've done a
Yeah.
great job explaining some of the considerations to, make sure that balance feels right to your
Yeah.
unique agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, Caitlyn, thank you so much for taking the time and being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin.
Thanks so much for listening to The Future of Surrogacy. If you liked today's episode, send it to a friend or a colleague that should hear it. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn to keep up with new episodes and behind the scenes updates. And if there's a topic you want us to cover or someone you think we should talk to, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.